Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from The Bunker, and I am thrilled to have another guest in The Bunker for another Bunker interview. I'm joined by Clint Riley, who hails from New Zealand originally, I believe, but currently living in Australia, and Clint is visiting me during a trip to Croatia. Clint, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So by the time this interview is uploaded, Clint, viewers will be familiar with a very interesting marking talk that took place. In case anyone hasn't heard the marking talk, maybe if we just play a brief clip now.
Brother B, he becomes a little bit puffed up, bit of pride, decides to take a different direction. In fact, when these doubts arise, he lets them keep on festering in his brain. He decides, well, you know what? I'm going to go to the internet and seek further clarification of my doubts through means outside of what Jehovah provides. Undoubtedly, at this point, he's now decided to go to apostate websites. Now, in the meantime, the elders start to sniff that there's someone in the congregation who needs help. Reports have started to come back, and a few of the elders have started to notice this situation. But he rejects the help from the elders, even sharing his new findings with others. Is that a good, accurate, reliable source to find out information about Jehovah's Witnesses on apostate websites? Brothers, we all know how useful the internet is, don't we? In fact, jw.org, which we use every day now, what a wonderful mechanism to reach people all over the earth. This has been an incredibly useful tool. And all the information we need to know about Jehovah's Witnesses is right there on jw.org.
So I was just blown away by this talk. It was dripping with strawman fallacies all the way through, and quite frankly, barely concealed hatred for the person about whom the marking talk was being given. I've already mentioned that, either you're an apostate or you're not. Apostasy isn't something you give a marking talk about. Apostasy is something you get disfellowshipped for. What was it like for you? We'll get to your story, which I think is most important, but I guess viewers are going to be most interested in knowing what it was like for you when you first heard that talk. Did you hear it as it was actually being given?
Yes, I did. We happened to phone into the phone link at the Kingdom Hall. I honestly didn't think the marking talk was going to be given. There was a local needs for that night, but my wife was like, no, I think there is going to be a marking talk. So we phoned in just to listen and see, and she happened to be right.
Right. And obviously, I think that the allotment in the service meeting was 15 minutes, but it went on for, I think, just for about 27 minutes.
Yeah, just under the 30-minute mark.
So it was a long talk. And talk us through your emotions as this talk is being given.
Honestly, I just laughed through the whole talk. If I was in the Kingdom Hall, sitting in the Kingdom Hall, I would have been laughing as well, because the content of the whole talk was ridiculous.
So you weren't necessarily worried about the effect it was going to be having on your reputation and with your friends and that kind of thing?
That kind of came the next day. I've only listened to it once, and I haven't listened to it again because I just don't see any point in rehashing it. I reflected on it a bit the next day, but because I'm fully awake to the truth about the truth, and I already knew at that stage that this marking talk is going to have no positive impact on any of the friendships that I had originally, I'd already kind of grieved what I had lost. So at the end of the day, I didn't really feel like I was losing out.
Well, you say that you kind of were awake and presumably almost grateful to be getting such a powerful demonstration of the very reasons why you were leaving, presumably. But there were also effects, weren't there, surely, on your family and on your kind of immediate loved ones? Was that not a factor?
Yeah, so there was a bit of an impact, and without going into too much detail and incriminating other people, there were people that didn't agree with the marking talk. They thought that there was no basis for it to begin with, and they were offering suggestions on what to do to try and combat this, because they feel like the marking talk was unjustified and it should be retracted. And I shared their sentiments about it, but I kind of already knew that they're not going to back down from it,
right,
no matter how hard we tried.
Yeah, elders never apologise.
No, and we went as far as writing to the Sydney Bethel a big long letter. I wrote about a 7-page letter with, scriptural references. There were no grounds, explained my side of the story, and it got escalated to 2 local circuit overseers, which basically I wasted an hour and a half of my time meeting with them.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Well, so you met with 2 circuit overseers. That's quite unusual for there to be 2 involved. Did the branch send these circuit overseers, or?
So yeah, I was a little bit surprised when I got a phone call from one circuit overseer, and he said, "Look, the branch has received your letter, and myself and our current circuit overseer have been assigned to meet with you and see how we can assist." And I had a bit of a chuckle to myself because I knew what the assistance was going to be. And I arranged to meet with them the following Sunday, and basically, as I said, it was a waste of an hour and a half. They basically their main purpose was to fix my relationship with Jehovah, because at the end of the day, this means my life. And if I don't fix that relationship with Jehovah, well, I'm going to die at Armageddon. And the other thing that they were focusing on is that, well, it doesn't matter what's happened. You just have to move forward from it and start going back to the meetings.
Wow. So there was zero remorse for the marking talk?
There was zero remorse for the marking talk, yes.
Because, without wanting to stress the point too much, you were being marked purely for having doubts.
We were, at the start of the marking talk, we were unsure of what we were being marked for. Because it sounded like it was about doubts, but by the end of it, it sounded like it was for apostasy.
Well, again, apostasy is a disfellowship.
Exactly. But the repercussions from it were very obvious by a drop in Instagram followers, or, it sounds very petty and trivial, but it just goes to show the mindset and the extent that these sorts of talks have over congregation members that basically can't tell the difference of what the marking talk is about. Yes, it might have been about doubts, but everyone read it as about apostasy. And general rank and file members can't establish the difference, even though elders know that there might be a difference, or they say that they know there's a difference.
I think, again, it just underscores what I said earlier about how elders just don't apologise. Here you have a clear example of a botch-up, where a body of elders has reached a decision to mark someone based purely on doubts, which isn't a marking offence. Apostasy is very much not a marking offence, but a disfellowshipping offence. And it seemed to me that while listening to the talk for the first time, they were almost trying to justify giving the talk by using the slippery slope fallacy of saying, well, imagine what it would lead to, which isn't a justification, because there's no... So astonishing.
Yeah.
You seem fairly philosophical about leaving the organisation, but as things stand, you are not disfellowshipped.
No.
Obviously, when this video gets uploaded, there's a very strong chance thousands of people will see it, potentially including members of your congregation who we already know are very sensitive
Yes.
about apostate material. So are you at all fazed about the thought of being disfellowshipped?
To be honest, it wouldn't change anything. I'm not losing any relationships that I haven't already lost. My parents, since they've been to the Love Never Fails convention,
The ironically titled
Yes.
Love Never Fails convention.
I've noticed that I haven't really heard from them, whereas even the week before that, I was hearing from them relatively regularly, and they're still talking to my wife. So they're messaging my wife, but not me.
Oh, so your wife is the middleman now?
Yeah, she is.
Middlewoman.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So I think it would be nice at this point, having exhausted more or less, the backlash from the marking talk, which I just found fascinating. I think it's one of the most fascinating talks about apostates that I've ever heard. It really showcases, the paranoia on full display. But I want to kind of focus a bit more on your story now. So how did you come to get embroiled in this religion to begin with?
So I was born into it, like 99% of Jehovah's Witnesses. Ever since day dot, it was meetings, witnessing, on a regular routine. Fun fact that I learnt recently about my father is that when my parents married, he actually wasn't baptized. And then he got baptized when he was about 25. And this is why he never pushed either of us to get baptized at a young age. So we were quite lucky in the respect that both myself and my sister got baptized when we were roughly around the age of 18. And because of that routine that we were in, we were isolated from everything. I mean, I can remember back at school, and my feelings about the religion really started back when I was in primary school, which I don't know what you'd call it in the UK, but
we call it primary school.
Primary school as well, yeah, up to about roughly the age of 10.
Do they call it elementary school for our American friends?
It's roughly up until the age of 10 or 12 that you'll in that part. And I remember a specific example. I think it was around Easter time, and I would have been 7, 8 or 9, and we had to do an Easter project. Or it was like a show and tell project for Easter. And my teacher at the time did not like Jehovah's Witnesses. So she really wanted to punish me for being a witness and embarrass me in front of the class. So she made my project be about, why don't Jehovah's Witnesses celebrate Easter? And I went home and I was not really happy about it. I was in tears. I didn't want to do it because I didn't like standing out as
I don't think
different.
Any child does, do they? Yeah.
So you add that on top of like not celebrating birthdays with your friends, not having Christmas. And like, I look at that now and go, you know what? I grew up without it. It's not a huge deal to me, because that was just my life. But I do remember that I had to give the presentation the next day. So that night, my homework was with my parents, like doing like a family worship and doing this big A3 cutout sheet of why we don't celebrate Easter. And I just got up the next day, and it was the worst.
Oh no!
I just didn't want to do it. Like it wasn't about feeling confident. I was just like, this just is ridiculous. Why do I have to be different to everyone else?
Did your parents help you in any way prepare the material?
They did, and they also bribed me with a new bicycle.
Really?
Yes.
So if you make an idiot of yourself in front of your classmates, you can have a new bike.
Well, ironically, I got a circuit assembly part giving that exact example up on stage.
Oh, that's perfect for a circuit assembly,
yeah,
isn't it?
Exactly. And there was myself, another couple of young ones.
I'm assuming you didn't mention the new bike in the...
No, I think I did. I think I did, and I think it got a laugh out of
right,
everyone
okay.
in the assembly hall that day. But and I know for a fact that one of the other young ones, a girl, she's not a witness anymore. Not that I've ever made contact with her or anything like that, but I do remember hearing that she had left as well. But yeah, it's just, and I guess, and after that as well, it was a Bethel speaker that did the part. And then because of that particular part, he then invited our whole family to come out and have lunch with him at Bethel as like a way of encouragement. And so it almost felt like I was being rewarded with an assembly part and with going out to Bethel, being specially invited out to Bethel to have lunch there, because that was considered a big privilege for the whole family to do that.
And this was in New Zealand.
This was in New Zealand,
and of
correct,
course there isn't actually a New Zealand Bethel anymore.
No, there isn't. No, so this would have been 20 years ago at least.
Sure. So you obviously received quite a lot of encouragement with your upbringing, and it seems that a lot of your belief involved basically keeping your parents happy. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's especially what it was probably about. Was keeping mum and dad happy, and going through my teenage years, like I had the classic JW teenager living a double life. In Auckland, there was a big party.
Well, I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated to hear more of that, because that's one thing I missed out on as a JW teenager, was living a double life. I was a goody two shoes, really. Yeah. So let's hear all about it.
Look, it's not as scandalous as I probably made it out to seem, but pretty much every young one in let's just say the North
How are we
Island.
Spelling young ones?
We're talking like 15 to...
No,
how are you spelling it? Yeah.
Young ones.
Do I need to say it more in a Kiwi accent as well? There was a big... We would be partying every weekend. There was a big drinking culture. But it was somewhat acceptable. Like, you never got pulled up on it, even if you were baptized. You never got pulled up for over drinking. We had kind of a motto where it would be like, if you can go out with the boys, you can get up with the men. So you can go out at night and then get up for witnessing or the meeting the next morning. I remember we did that one night, and it was a circuit overseer visit, and we had to do the walk of shame right up to the front row of the hall with bloodshot eyes and 5 o'clock shadow, and look at the circuit overseer directly in his eye. And I leant over to my best mate and said, just don't look directly at him.
Wow.
That was our weekends. And it got my parents fired up a couple of times, more so my mother. My mother is very, very devout. So she would get very angry about it a lot of the time. But it would never really go any further than that. I know she tried to kick me out of home once.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but that's because they went away for the weekend and I threw a big party. So
yeah. Well, fair dues.
Yeah.
So you had a rebellious kind of few teenage years.
Yeah.
Usually you kind of, that has like a shelf life. Did you kind of mature out of that and settle down a bit, or want to take the truth more seriously? I hate calling it the truth.
Yeah.
Never call it the truth.
Yeah.
Did you want to take the organisation more seriously at any point?
So I have tried 2 or 3 times to take it far more seriously. But that probably didn't come till like I was 28, 29, perhaps. I did the usual New Zealand, Australian thing where we move over to London for a couple of years and you go flatting with a whole lot of witnesses, and then you're out partying 5 nights a week. At that stage, there was
you were attending a Kingdom Hall in London.
That's correct.
For a while,
yeah. And eventually the drinking did catch up, but it didn't only catch up with me. It caught up with one of my other good friends at the time there.
While you were in London?
While I was in London.
So you got counselled for drinking?
They tried to.
Right.
So this is an interesting story. I remember it was my last few weeks in London, and I was just sleeping on someone's couch because my rental property lease had expired. So I was just crashing on on my mate's couch, and he went out one night, came home, and he said something weird just happened. I was like, "Oh, what?" He goes, "I just went to a judicial committee," and I'm like, "Really? Did you know you were going to one?" He's like, "No."
Kind of sleepwalked into one.
Yeah. It's kind of like he walked in there, they asked him a question, and he said, "Well, okay, yes, that did happen." They're like, "Okay, well, this is now a judicial committee. We're having it right now."
Wow.
And then he came home and said, "Also, they want to talk to you."
Oh, right, okay.
My friend said to me, "Look, they want to talk to you. You should probably go talk to them." So I spent a couple of days ringing around trying to figure out what was going on, and no one seems to have said anything. And so I met up with them, and they sit me down and they go, "Look, is there anything you want to tell us?" I'm like, "No." And they're like, are you sure about it? And they read me the scripture about confessing your sins and the elders helping you out. And I'm like, "No, what? Like, obviously you know something I don't. So what is it?" And they wouldn't tell me. And I'm like, "Well, if you've got nothing to say to me, like, I think we're probably done here."
Yeah.
And then I went on a 3-week trip around Europe and then moved to Australia.
Okay. So you got off the hook there.
Well, kind of. The letter that was sent
the letter of recommendation. Then
well, it wasn't really a recommendation.
No.
It was a relatively scathing one from what I could tell.
Okay.
And the weird thing is that, like, I still attended all the meetings. I still went witnessing every weekend, even though my work schedule was nights. I worked like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and a Sunday night. So regardless of that schedule, I still went out witnessing, still went to the meetings, still answered at every meeting. So as far as I was concerned, I was doing everything I was meant to, but there was this thing, they had a problem. I don't know. I feel like someone, and I'm going to say it was a girl in the congregation that was probably a little bit jilted by my friend. And she didn't like me because of another story, which I'm not going to go into. And so I think she just caused some trouble because the party that we were at was at her place, but she didn't like her flatmates and basically no one liked her. So she was just causing trouble.
But what interests me about this whole story is that you're painting a picture of someone who is working very hard. We're talking a young lad who has a very active social life, who is burning the candle at both ends, partying hard, and yet is still going to meetings, all the meetings, and therefore taking the faith seriously. Was there any kind of internal conflict with what your faith was demanding of you and what your kind of, you could say, your youth was demanding of you?
No. I don't think so, because I had some really good friends, and we didn't feel like we were super restricted. It was kind of like a don't ask, don't tell policy. If we could get away with it, it was fine because we were still doing all the other stuff that was required of us.
So because you were going to the meetings, everything was kind of balanced out.
Yeah. And, you know, out of all the vices that you can get punished for, drinking is probably the only one that witnesses can have and get away with. So
because everyone's drinking.
Because everyone's drinking.
Including, we recently learned, governing body members.
Yeah. It's just the one and only vice that everyone could get away with without any sort of serious repercussions. Fornicate and you're in the back room straight away, but drinking you can probably get away with 3 or 4 times before, and I never got hauled up on it once.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you're back in Australia. Talk us through what happened next. Was you have a bad letter of recommendation?
Yeah.
Did you feel you needed to kind of straighten things out and get on the straight and narrow?
So, when my first few weeks in the congregation, I got pulled into the back room when my letter had arrived, and a youngish elder, like an elder 2 or 3 years older than me, and the brother that gave the marking talk, they basically sat me down and said, "Look, your letter of recommendation wasn't great. We don't care about what's happened in the past. If you're prepared to work now and like put in the effort, we'll use you, and we'll help you progress." And I was like, you know what? This is a fresh start. Let's give it a fair crack of the whip. There's a good Australian slang for you. So I did. So I buckled down. I moved in with another brother that I was living with in London, who's been a lifelong friend. Our parents are very good friends from New Zealand. And we just kind of both buckled down. And I was doing more in the ministry. I was attending all the meetings. My social life wasn't as active, but if anyone has ever lived in London, you'll attest that no social life can match a London social life.
Okay. Your opportunities were more limited.
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Okay.
And also the young ones in the congregation, well, like people in there, I was getting a bit older, so my group of friends was like around the 30-year-old mark, and everyone had moved past that, and everyone was really progressing and trying hard. It was a central congregation, so there were a few people already in there that I knew from back home already. So I kind of slotted straight in, and because all these ones were doing really well, I kind of just followed suit, like positive peer pressure.
Okay.
But still not really questioning any of the doctrine, questioning why we do certain things or anything like that, because it's all I knew, and I was comfortable.
Yeah. Okay. And how did you? At some point, you get married, obviously.
Yes. So, my first, I always forget how long I've been in Sydney. I think it's probably 6 to 7 years now, and been married for the last 3.5. And we dated between dating and married was probably about 18 months. And in that 2 years before we started dating, and even while we were dating, I was actually on the cusp of being appointed. They kept dangling the carrot in front of me.
As a ministerial servant.
Yeah, as a ministerial servant. And they kept dangling the carrot in front of me, and they're like, "You're just there, you're almost there." I would auxiliary pioneer months that I could. And then it got to a point where I was like, no.
Just for the benefit of, because I have a lot of viewers who don't know all the parlance, so auxiliary pioneer is when you're doing 50 hours per month, but it's not like you have to do it every month. So you'll basically say you'll designate a number of months, or maybe just 1 month when you can do 50 hours. I think during special campaigns it drops down to like 30. Yeah. But yeah, so you were doing far above average the number of the normal number of hours, which there's like a rule of thumb that you do at least 10 as a JW, but you were putting in 50 at one point.
So
yeah.
I was probably putting in more than all the elder body, like each individual elder, each individual ministerial servant. Yet I was never appointed, and at the time, probably about.
And it's just to clarify, this is preaching that we're talking about. Yeah, when we're talking about hours, it sounds really weird, but witnesses really do count their hours.
I need to get rid of the lingo. 3 to 6 months before my wife and I started dating, I was kind of in between jobs. One job that I was at didn't really work out, and so it was at the end of 1 year, and so I took the holidays to kind of reassess what I wanted to do. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to give regular auxiliary pioneering a go. And to do that, I'm going to start my own business so I could work 3 days a week and be out in the ministry the other 2, or work 3 to 4 days a week and still be able to get the time. So I ended up buying into a pool cleaning franchise, which is a very popular industry in Sydney, and started doing that. Did that 3 to 4 days a week and went witnessing the other few days. So, and that obviously got the attention of the brothers, but you know, I was doing that for a year and a half, and even though they were sort of like dangling that ministerial servant carrot.
When you say it got the attention of the brothers, do you mean in a good way or in a bad way?
In a good way.
In a good way.
Because I was sacrificing.
Right.
What little they didn't know is that I was looking for a part-time job that got me a full-time salary.
Right.
So it wasn't actually really affecting me financially. I was still making a full-time salary because I was working for myself, and if you're self-employed in Australia, you generally earn a very good wage. And then auxiliary pioneering the other for the rest of the time. And I was doing really well for 12 to 18 months. My wife, she wasn't a regular pioneer at the time, but she used to be. And then before we got married, she started up again. So that was our goal, was we were... once we got married, I was going to actually step up to regular pioneering. And so we could regular pioneer together.
Was the goal kind of SKE or something like that? One of the schools, or missionary work or anything like that?
So my wife wanted to go somewhere else and serve where the need was greater. That sounded pretty good to me. But after we got married, I kind of got a little bit more involved in my business. And I'd built it up to a point where I didn't really want to let it go. And I built it up to a point where I didn't really... I wasn't super motivated to jump up to regular pioneering. I was quite comfortable just doing the 50 hours and working. And that caused a little bit of tension between my wife and I, because obviously we'd said we'd do one thing and I've kind of changed my mind.
Right.
Changed my mind about it.
Yeah.
But in the end, like, she continued to regular pioneer. I continued to regular auxiliary pioneer. We still spent all one day, like one whole day a week, like for 10 to 12 hours out in the ministry. We'd do a cart witnessing shift and spend another full day out on the ministry, including a cart witnessing shift, and then go to the meeting. I was working 4 days a week. My job was very busy during summer, so my work was very busy, and I'd be working quite a lot more hours than I would in winter, and then winter it's just too cold to go out. So
Right. One thing that fascinates me, we were talking about this earlier, is I left the organisation. Well, I stopped attending meetings in around 2010, 2011, just before car witnessing came in. And we were talking earlier, you and your wife have obviously spent a lot of time car witnessing.
Yes.
Is it effective?
No. So it was...
What's a typical day like?
You just for carts or for like a full day?
Gosh, this is getting complicated now.
Okay, I'll tell you what our regular schedule was.
Yeah, sure.
So we would go out carts first thing in the morning. It's like 7 a.m. Spend a couple hours there, go to the group, do first call work, so knocking on doors for the morning. Then return visits in the afternoon, and then we had studies that took us through to about 6 p.m. Then on Saturday, we would sometimes do carts in the summer. We would then meet the field service group and support the field service group. Then we would go do a metropolitan shift in the afternoon.
So a metropolitan shift, for those of you who don't understand the parlance, is when you stand next to a cart in a densely populated metropolitan city area, such as, I'm guessing, the middle of Sydney.
Yeah, so
which you need to basically fill out an application form and say that you're whiter than white. And you even get, I did a video on this, you even get graded in some cases as to how good you are.
Yes, and I know people who have been rejected from
right.
from doing that special. It's considered a special privilege.
Yeah.
That only the elite of the local area.
Even though
allowed
you're
to do
doing
it.
the exact same thing as you would be doing in a small town, it just happens to be in the middle of a city.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who, because they dress sloppy, they don't have a great grasp on English, or they're very, for lack of a better term, combative when they're out in the ministry. Like, we're talking about ones that stick their foot in the door when...
I'd love footage of a combative Jehovah's Witness.
I've got many, many stories from the ministry about combative Jehovah's Witnesses.
Wow.
So yeah, we'd go do a shift for 3 hours, then we'd go to the meeting, and then that would be, we'd have one sort of like dinner a week that we would then go out after the meeting, and we'd either go out just by ourselves as kind of like our date night, or we'd go out with friends for dinner somewhere, and my wife would usually pick the restaurant.
But your typical cart, I don't know, your time stood next to a cart was typically how long in duration?
It was either between 2 or 3 hours.
Okay, so in a typical 3 hours of standing next to one of those carts, what happens?
You stand next to the carts.
Come on,
So-
give me some more to go on here.
I wish I could. So every 6 months we would have a meeting about the carts, and they would give us local direction about what to do. And it's funny doing this trip around Europe at the moment, and we've pretty much seen carts in every city. I think the only one... No, actually we just came from Budapest, and we did see carts there.
You're not going to see carts in Zagreb for reasons I have yet to discover. We go into Zagreb quite a lot, and we never see them there. So,
But
yeah.
it's interesting to see how vastly different the procedures are between each different city.
protocols. For the
Yeah,
carts.
no, but it is like that. In Sydney, we're not allowed to sit down.
Oh,
So they basically said to us at one meeting, if you can't stand for 3 hours, take a hike.
oh wow.
like not in that
Was
terminology.
this one of the combative Jehovah's Witnesses who said that?
No, they just said, well, if you don't have the energy to stand for 3 hours,
Right.
you shouldn't.
I'm starting to build a picture, including with the marking talk, of some very jumped up elders in the Sydney area.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, go on.
But the reason that you were supposed to stand is because if you look on the broadcasting or any of the videos that feature the cart witnessing, everyone is standing.
Big deal.
But
That's not a reason to
But
stand.
that was their reason
Oh, right, okay.
for it. And then we've been around looking at all the different carts in Germany, Munich specifically. They didn't even have the carts out. They had 4 people in a group. One was holding one of the sandwich boards, or 2 of them were holding sandwich boards, and the 2 others were just passing out the magazines to people.
And we all know where they end up.
Yeah, and we saw a few of them littered round.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in other cities, they were just sitting around talking.
But psychologically, I mean, you're saying that you'll stand there for 2 or 3 hours and nothing will happen. So what does that do to you psychologically? It must be draining for you.
I found it incredibly boring.
Right.
I know other people who do the witnessing just view it as a way to get easy hours.
Did you feel that way?
I would have preferred just to have stayed home, to be perfectly honest.
I know, but in terms of
yes,
having to get your hours in.
It was
yeah.
an easy way to go, like, okay, well, I'm going to get like 5 or 6 hours just by doing this. If I'm short on time, all I have to do is go do a cart shift in the city, and it's done. And they're always screaming out for brothers, like, because you can't just have 2 sisters doing it, and you can't just have an unmarried brother and sister doing a shift together. Unless it's extenuating circumstances where someone cancels last minute, the cart shift must always go ahead, rain, hail, or shine. And there's a lot of importance. Like even at the Metropolitan meeting, they said special Metropolitan witnessing takes precedence over your local congregation door-to-door ministry. But I don't think the elders got that memo in each local congregation, because they would then turn around and say, no, you need to be out supporting the congregation, even though our congregation had 30 pioneers at the time.
Interesting. Well, thank you for that insight. Again, I'm fascinated by cart witnessing. You were saying as well earlier that you reckon that 7 times out of 10, if someone comes up to a cart, they're an apostate.
Yes.
And that was your perception as a Jehovah's Witness?
That was my perception, because the only people I ever remember talking to are people who were ex-witnesses.
Right. Okay.
I know my wife actually started a couple of studies that she passed on to my sister-in-law because they were in that territory, which I think they're still
Well, that must
progressing.
surely have given her some motivation to carry on with it. It's
Yeah,
starting studies from it.
But we've been doing this for 2 years, 3? No, ever since we're married, so 3.5, 4 years.
Right.
Metropolitan shift, and that's the only time we've ever seen a study happen.
Right. That's a lot of hours for
Yes.
only 2 individuals to want to start a study.
Yeah, and
Okay.
we don't even know if they're going to get baptized, if they're progressing or anything like that. And they did hold up at the last meeting that I went to, and I was kind of already waking up at the stage, and I was kind of pointing out to my wife that this really isn't that effective. Where they interviewed someone who was the only person in Sydney who has been baptized off the carts, and they were selling it as, yes, we may be putting in all these hours, but it's worth it just to have
We've
this.
got one.
We've got one. But when you actually break it down and the amount of hours that have gone into it, like
And the amount of people.
the amount of people, like, and I think witnesses justify it to themselves that, well, you know what, people might not come and talk to us, but they see the carts, they see the signs, they see the jw.org website, and we don't know what happens. But I think that's just, it's just a way to keep people busy and keep people engaged in a work that's ultimately really ineffective.
Do you think that's why the governing body persists with carts, even though it's clearly not bringing in the numbers? Because, well, at least it's a token activity that people...
Yeah,
involve
I
themselves
think
in,
it is. I think it's just a waste of time.
Okay.
And if anything, as I said before, you get a lot of apostates coming up and talking to you. Some of them are subtle. Some of them are very, very aggressive. And I do actually remember one time I actually called the police on him because he was being very, very disruptive. And there were other cases where there was this one guy in Sydney who was on a bike that would just go round and just kick the carts over.
Wow.
Which I don't think he was apostate. I think he was just probably raised a witness, but he was gay. And obviously he, being gay, doesn't gel well with the Bible teachings. So he was obviously traumatized or very hurt by something like that.
Did his kicking the carts over make you more endeared towards his cause or less endeared?
Well, this is the point I was about to make. It actually reinforces that persecution complex. Like,
Right.
well, like, oh, look at these guys. They're just going around out of their way to, like, try and annoy us, like try and detract from it. And I agree that there is a right and a wrong way about going it. I'm not going to go into what I think is right or wrong.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to offend any people who
Sure.
who feel they do what they need to do to bring attention to the bad practices. But it definitely, when you act in an aggressive way towards a witness, they just go into their shell and they just think that this means we have the truth, like, because we are being persecuted.
Right. So if I know my viewers, they are going to have 3 questions
Okay.
by this point. First of all, did Clint ever make it to ministerial servant? Second, how did Clint wake up? And third, how did Clint's wife... I know we're not going to talk about your wife too much, but it's still, a big deal for you.
Yep.
Waking up is, how is my spouse going to react? So,
Yep.
First of all, did you make it to ministerial servant?
No. So that carrot got dangled a little bit further. So once we were married and we'd come back from honeymoon, they basically hauled me into the back room and said, look, we're just going to give you time to settle into marriage, and then we'll look at basically appointing you. I'm like, okay. I never got there because, without going into too many details, I think like most marriages, especially in a witness environment, when you're living with someone for the first time, there's teething issues. So we had some.
You've never been in that situation before. Yeah.
So we had teething issues for 12 to 18 months, which, you know, is resolved now, of course, as we've learnt to live with each other and accept each other, etc. like that. But because of that basically pushed the goalpost by another couple of years.
Do you feel as though the restrictions that are placed on young people make it difficult to settle into a relationship when that time finally comes?
Yes. It's why we didn't have a fast courtship by any means. It was about 18 months, which I think especially when I was 30...
Well, from starting dating someone to actually walking down the aisle, it's not that long, is it? A year and a half?
It's not. It's not, but by witness terms, I know people who get, especially around my age at the time, when you're about 30, it was done and dusted in 6 months.
Right.
So I know one guy who was actually my groomsman. He was done and dusted in 6 months.
Good grief.
Yeah. And that's for reasons that I'm not going to go into.
Well, I think we can guess what the reasons are.
Yes, when you're
the reason
when
is.
you're 38 years old. And,
but yeah, it had an impact.
It had an impact, and I think when that kind of got pushed, I just kind of gave up a little bit.
What do you mean when that got pushed?
So, like, the goalposts were pushed to being a ministerial
So
survey.
they've been dangling this carrot, and then they say, actually, you know...
And then because of...
Don't call us, we'll call you.
Yeah. And because we were working out, like, living together and being married, it just kept getting pushed back. So I just kind of... I guess you could say I just gave up. Like, I stopped caring about it.
Okay. And did this impact on your awakening process at all, or what was it that triggered you to start having doubts?
It's funny. I've thought about this a lot, and whether, you know, where I could exactly pinpoint it to. I think, if I'm being honest with myself, I was probably always half awake. There was a lot of stuff I couldn't swallow, but because it didn't really negatively impact me, I didn't really care about it. And I was still enjoying my life for as much as I could. I do remember back when I was about 16, and I had this discussion with my parents as well, and they contest it, thinking that I've got the dates wrong. But I'm gonna go with this because this is my recollection of it. September 10th, 2001. I remember telling my parents, I don't want to go to meetings anymore. I don't want to be a witness. I don't want to do this. Like, I don't like it. And then we all know what happened. The very next day, we woke up to September 11th. 2001.
Yeah, it did have a bit of an impact, didn't it? I can remember I was 21 at that time, and I can remember, and my mother had just died, and I can remember saying to my sister, just look at the television. It's happening. It's happening now, you know?
So, you know, it wasn't even 24 hours, and I was like, oh, maybe this is a sign. Like, maybe I'm making a grave mistake. And that did, like, upset my parents, and they reckon it was in a different house. We moved around quite a lot because my dad's a builder, so he would build homes, would move into them, finish them, sell them off. We always lived in half-finished houses. And then a couple of years later, my sister and I never really got along really well, and I think I was a little bit jealous of her because she was kind of Dad's favorite, so she got up to more mischief than I did, and she would get away with more stuff than I would, because she seemed to be Dad's favorite. My sister then got married. She was disfellowshipped, got reinstated, and then she kind of just left. She just didn't really come back. And then after that, the 2016 regional convention, or I don't know if it was regional back then still, where there was the talk about even if someone is baptized but they're not, and what they've done,
they're inactive and they're doing something that you know is immoral, then you can shun them.
You should be shunning them. So from that point on, my parents effectively soft shunned her, and because her and I never had the best relationship, it didn't really concern me. I hadn't really spoken to her for quite a bit of time, and I kind of used that as an excuse not to talk to her for a little bit longer. I forgot where I was going, where my train of thought was going.
So we were talking about what led to you waking up, and am I sensing that your relationship with your sister may have played some kind of role in keeping things suppressed? Or
yeah, it did a little bit, and I guess you could say for some, if I go back to like through my 20s and that sort of stuff, because the religion never negatively impacted me. Yes, I did have one judicial at one time, but that wasn't really a super negative impact. It did sort of shock me a little bit. I didn't get disfellowshipped, but I was privately reproved, and I did kind of sort of pull my socks up a little bit after that. But then what I realized later is that basically all my friends were getting privately reproved anyway, so it wasn't really for the same thing. Yeah. And so because it wasn't negatively impacting me, I didn't really have to question anything.
Aside from your relationship with your sister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What really got me questioning was getting married.
Right.
So if I say that I was always half awake, but if I could probably pinpoint a time, it was probably getting married.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the responsibility of being a spiritual head, having to do family worship every week, and the exhausting routine that comes along with not only are you working, you're pioneering, but you're now a spiritual head.
Because when you're single, you can basically fly under the radar, can't you?
Correct.
You can roll up on a Sunday and quickly scribble some underlines on your watchtower and make it look like you've studied your watchtower. Yeah. You don't have to observe the day's text every day. There's all sorts of ways in which you can cut corners, which will immediately be obvious. And probably your wife had been cutting a few corners too, but she
was pretty regular, and we were actually doing family worship, leading up.
Well, that would be a problem then. Yeah.
And then when all of a sudden, it kind of dropped off, it started becoming a problem. But for me though, growing up, my dad, once he was appointed as an elder, and this is no disrespect to my dad, but he was an absent father. Right. He was on the regional building committee, so he was away every second Wednesday night at the regional building committee meeting. Then at least one weekend a month, he was gone for 5 days. So we were effectively raised spiritually by my mother because my father was away doing things for the organisation, like building kingdom halls all around New Zealand. And my mother and my sister didn't have the best relationship either. So mum always struggled to do sort of a family worship routine with us. We were never forced to do the day's text every morning. We were actually never forced to do family worship. So I didn't view it as important because I didn't have that family worship structure in place when I was growing up. And so now I was married and I was tired. I had other interests as well, like hobbies. And I was like, I'm tired. I really don't want to do this.
So getting married was kind of the beginning of the end.
It was, because we eventually got to, it sort of had a critical mass. And my wife wasn't happy with what I was doing spiritually.
Even though you were doing 50 hours per month in the preaching?
Well, my hours had started to drop off.
Right.
So I wasn't actually doing the 50 hours. I'd get between 40 or 50, 40 to 45 every month. And if I missed a day during the week, I wouldn't bother to try and make it up. So that's why I was always hovering around sort of the 40-hour mark. But I did that consistently for 2 years, and I never got counselled on it. It seemed to... And I don't know if that's because I was doing more than most of the other brothers in the congregation anyway. And if it was just based on hours, I should have been appointed as a ministerial servant. But they kept making up excuses. Oh, you're not commenting enough. Oh, you haven't marked your watchtower. You haven't done all that. I was like, it's too hard.
So at what point does simple exhaustion, it sounds like, from the faith actually give way to full-on doubts about the religion and whether you want to remain a part of it?
So it was probably about 9 months ago. My wife and I were up witnessing. We knocked on a door in our territory.
Only 9 months ago, and we're now in July 2019.
Yeah, about
so
October last year. So there were a couple of things like, the stars collided, moons collided, whatever you call it, moons aligned. And one thing was we met an apostate on the doors. And we were talking to her for about 10 minutes. And then after about 5 minutes, I kind of realized, like, hang on, this is... she knows a bit of the loaded language. So we asked her, and she said, oh, yeah, I used to be a witness. I used to be a regular pioneer. Later, I found out that this is the same lady that woke up Paul Grundy of JW Facts. So that was a funny little coincidence.
A lot of people's grandmother in terms of awakening.
Yeah. And the only reason I made the connection was because she said, oh, this guy that used to be in Bethel made a website, you should check it out. I never got the name, but later on I made the connection. I actually spoke to Paul about it because obviously he lives in Sydney. And he was like, yeah, I meet up with her all the time. Around the same time, my wife, an elder in a sister congregation, had made a post on Instagram about one of Russell's old books. It wasn't one of the popular ones. It was just like one of the random ones that he did. But what he did was he opened it to the front page or the second page, and it's got the image of all the pyramids and all the measurements.
Yeah, the fold out. It's from the Divine Plan of the Ages.
That's the one.
Volume 1, yeah.
Yep. And he actually posted something about it. This is an elder, and he actually posted something. I'm going, isn't it nice knowing the rich spiritual heritage that we've got? And then there was a comment underneath it that said, isn't it amazing what we used to believe and what we believe now? And that combined with the meeting the lady on the doors was like, okay, all right. But I kind of shelved it a little bit after that, but it kind of never really left me. And then if I go back to it, our relationship sort of hit a critical mass spiritually where my wife was kind of like, look, you need to do something. Like, you're meant to be a spiritual head. You need to, like, sort this out. Like, because I didn't get married to just be basically married to a slacker. Like, when we got married, you promised that we'd do this, this, and this. We haven't done any of this, and it's really upsetting, so you need to sort it out. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, all right, that's fair enough. Because we weren't doing family worship at the time. We weren't doing anything. So I was like, okay, all right, I'll sort this out. So I was like, well, what's the one thing that if I could disprove the whole religion, what is the one thing that would do that? And I remember a study article series, like it was just in the Watchtower, over 2 articles about 587 verse 607. And so I always had in the back of my mind, I knew there was some contention about that. So I printed off all the articles. I actually did some in-depth study on all the...
Weren't these around 2010 or 2011, like some articles that were intended to make excuses for it?
I feel like it was 2013, but it could be 2011. And I read through it, and I was like, this makes no sense. Like, if anything, this actually proves 587.
Yeah.
And even, I remember specifically, there was an asterisk right at the end of the article that said that all the Bible scholars and historians that they'd quoted, it had a little asterisk down the bottom saying, none of these scholars or historians
the year 607,
support the year 607.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how can you write like 8 pages of stuff that...
in defense of a year that none of your sources agree with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yet they used the quotes to support that, well, just to disprove that 587 might be incorrect. So at this stage, I haven't like delved into any sort of like apostate material. I do remember like a few months previous, like in between, so probably about Feb and October last year, I did attempt to read Crisis of Conscience because that had popped up on... Every now and then I'd read the Wikipedia page on Jehovah's Witnesses, and I actually thought it was a relatively accurate page. But then I remember reading about Ray Franz and Crisis of Conscience, and I actually started reading it, and I think I got about 2 or 3 chapters in. I was like, this is really boring, but I think it was just my cognitive dissonance just saying, you should not be reading this.
Yeah. Abort.
Yeah, exactly. But my wife didn't know that. She didn't know that I'd started like reading the Crisis of Conscience, because she would just absolutely flip out. So I'm sort of like sitting there, like I'd finished work. I only had half day of work. So I was like, you know what? I've got some spare time. I'm going to like do this. So I printed out all the articles. I printed out supporting articles for like all the kings and how they lined up and all that sort of stuff, and I put it all into like a not a calculation but a table, and everything kept going back to 586, 587. And the one thing that really annoyed me was everything was correct except when they start talking about Nebuchadnezzar and his reign starting 20 years later, even though all the other dates agree with what's his name's, the historian's timetable for the kings of Babylon. The one that most historians rely on as the most reliable.
You can't.
Canon of Ptolemy.
Oh, right, yeah.
Canon of Ptolemy? Yeah, something like that. But that was the only one that was different. But there was no supporting evidence that it started 20 years later. They just threw that date in there. And I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense. So I started Googling. And I made sure I avoided apostate websites. But I found a website where someone in Brazil, South America somewhere, decided to go and email all the quoted scholars and historians, say, this is what you've been quoted as saying, is this correct? All of them came back saying responded that they've been quoted out of context.
Right.
And that they firmly believe that Jerusalem fell in 587.
Yeah.
So I looked at the article, which was obvious hogwash to begin with.
Yeah.
And I read it like 4 or 5 times. And all I could see, each time I read it, all I could see was that they were just trying to disprove 587 without offering any evidence for 607 outside of the fact that the Bible says so it has to be true. So, and then I found another website about someone who had looked into all the star dates to match up what was on the VAT. I can't remember the number of it.
I know what you mean, yeah.
And he matched it up on the NASA lunar calendar, and it matches 5, 6, 7. So you can go the 20 years later, or however it was. And at this stage, like, my wife had come home from work and she'd seen me. Our bed was covered.
She'd seen the wall covered in newspaper clippings and bits of string and.
So she saw our bed was just covered.
And you in the corner, like.
Yeah. she saw over the bed, like, I had like about 30 pages of stuff printed out, highlighted, like noted. I'd never done so much study in my whole entire life before. Right. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm studying about like 607, 587, and I think Watchtower's got it wrong." And she's like, "Why is that important anyway?" And I'm like, "Well, it's kind of a big deal because that's how you get like 1914.
1914 is how you get 1919. Yeah. 1919 is how you get the governing body.
Yeah. Without 1914, you have nothing. You have no religion. And I don't. It didn't have as big an impact on her as it did on me, because I was just like, well, this just deshelves the whole religion. Like it possibly can't be true then. So I started messaging my dad, who's been in out of like 20, 25 years. And they kept firing stuff at me going, "What about this? What about this?" And I was like, "No, but look at this and look at this and look at that." And it actually got to a point where he said, "I can't talk about this with you anymore. I think you just need to drop it and wait on Jehovah and see if any new light comes through." And I was like, okay, there's something up here.
Yeah. Checkmate.
So then my wife was like, "Well, you need to go talk to the elders about it." And I was like, I don't know if that's such a good idea.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. Because I just didn't think it would help. Like, if I can prove that it's not, they have to believe that it's 607. So
why are we assuming that they're experts on Middle Eastern history?
How are we going to meet in the middle? The only way we're meeting in the middle is me just dropping it.
Yeah.
So in the end, like, I went, my wife was out with another pioneer sister, and she brought it up with the pioneer sister, who was an elder's wife as well. And she said, "Oh, go talk to this person in the congregation, because this person basically said that that was the one thing that stopped them from getting baptized, is that they couldn't reconcile 1914. And so I went and spoke to that person, and she was like, "No, it's fine. I'm fine with that. I didn't have any problems with it." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And she goes, "But go talk to this elder, because he's really knowledgeable in it. He's studied up on it." So I went and spoke to him, and he was like, "I don't know that much about it, but over the course of 2 conversations, it basically came down to, well, it says 70 years in the Bible, and the Bible is true, so the Bible trumps what any evidence there is." I'm like, it's not really a satisfying answer. And of course, I'd started looking into...
And the 70 years in the Bible is 70 years of domination, not desolation.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you read that now, you can see there is a clear difference in what was actually intended to be said. And then at that time, I'd also started looking at pyramidology as well, and I'm going, well, this is ridiculous, and starting to look at the history of Russell, and actually, going back to the the end of the 18th century with John Aquila Brown. And so I went right back. I went down a really deep rabbit hole. And I was like, none of this matches up. This is just a religion that came out of a movement where Russell was dissatisfied with so he just thought he'd make it up as he went.
Yeah, an era of crackpots.
Yeah.
And silly theories. Yeah.
And then I started looking into all the dates, and that had been, I knew of 1975, and especially from the convention a couple of years ago, and about how some people had unrealistic expectations. That's just a whitewashed version of what actually happened. And then when you start going to research stuff on Watchtower Online, you can't get certain Watchtower articles. because they're deemed as old light and incorrect now.
Well, yeah, the Watchtower Library only goes back to 1950.
For Watchtower, I think it does.
Yeah,
but for
the Awake, it's
1975.
Yeah,
or it might even be
1970. Yeah.
Because I remember reading about the excommunication part, and that was in 1948 or 49 or something like that, where they condemned the Catholic Church for...
That was 47.
47.
Yeah.
And I was really annoyed I couldn't get that from the website. But yeah, my wife and I were there going on a trip, and I was like, I'm reading Crisis of Conscience while we were away. So we went away for 10 days, finished Crisis of Conscience, and went, yep, I'm out.
Wow. So you reach a massive impasse with 607, or you realise that it's nonsense. This prompts you to read Crisis of Conscience, and you say, I'm done.
Yep.
How does this tie in with the marking talk?
So just before we went away for the couple of weeks, I'm not going to say too much out of respect for my wife, because she has nothing to do with this, but she had been talking to a friend of hers, and with the aim to help me understand the 607, 587. But at this stage, it had prompted some doubts of her own. I had already spoken to a friend of mine who was disfellowshipped last year, and I basically just wanted to kind of reach out to him because I was like kind of waking up fully at that stage. I kind of just wanted to reach out to him and see why he was disfellowshipped, whether he had disassociated himself, or whether he was disfellowshipped for non-belief or apostasy. And it turns out he wasn't. But that kind of triggered the elders' attention. So after I'd asked my question to the elders, and then I rang my friend who was disfellowshipped.
Because when you're listening to the marking talk, the guy who's giving it is telling the congregation, imagine an individual who, and the elders give them help, and the elders answer their questions. I forget how they put it. And he persists. He persists in spreading.
Yeah.
Is that how it happened?
No. So none of my intention was to subvert anyone's faith.
Right.
Like, I feel like everyone has the choice. If they want to know, they have the internet. They can go look for it themselves. But I wanted to, because it was a shock. Him being disfellowshipped was a shock.
Yeah.
No one knew it was going on. And so I feel like he had been, he hadn't been at very many meetings. He wasn't answering or anything. So you could tell that he was in kind of a bad place anyway, spiritually, as we would view it. But so I just rang him, and he's my accountant as well. So I had a valid reason for ringing him. And I said, look, I just want to have an offline conversation between you and me. Like, did you get disfellowship for non-belief? And he's like, no. I'm like, okay, that's cool. That's all I need to know. And he's like, why are you asking this? And I was like, look, I've just been looking into the history of the witnesses. There's a few things that have troubled me, and I'm having a hard time reconciling a bit of it. He's like, look, don't worry. I'm not going to say anything. Like, I don't have a horse in this race, so don't worry about it. Literally, he hung up the phone and then rang his...
Oh, wow.
His,
that is really devious, isn't it?
His brother-in-law, who is the same brother who gave the marking talk.
Gosh. That is really devious to say, oh, no worries, we'll pretend this never happened,
Yeah.
and immediately...
Yeah. And then at the same time, as I mentioned before, my wife had been talking to her friend who is a Bethelite, and obviously her husband would be an elder. And they were discussing it, and she was having the discussion with her on the basis that it would remain confidential. She basically the next day ran into a Bethelite elder in our congregation at Bethel and said, I've had this conversation with Clint and Ange, I'm really concerned. So that was number 3, I guess you could say. And then there were another couple of scenarios that kind of added concern to the elders as well. But they had no evidence, I guess you could say. There was no...
All they had was you expressing doubts.
Yes, correct.
Were they right in saying that they answered your questions?
No. Because...
Were they right in saying that they helped you?
No. Because they gave us the opportunity to meet up with them, but by that stage I was fully awake and I was like, I'm not saying anything, because anything I say now
can and will be used in evidence.
Will be used against me. And yeah, and that's basically, I just went cold turkey. I just dropped off the radar completely. They sent texts, I ignored them because I knew an investigative committee had been formed, but I also knew that they had no solid evidence for a judicial committee, and that by getting me in a room, they were just looking for a confession from me to basically strike me off.
It seems as though this whole thing with the marking talk and with the way the marking talk came about really underscores how almost impossible it is to have sincere doubts unless you are willing to basically disappear into a state of total and utter denial where you don't talk to anyone about it, including your wife. If you're willing to do that, then you're going to stay safe. But if you talk to almost anyone about it, at least in this congregation, in your congregation, it's going to be hell.
And that's what I actually planned to do. I was like, you know what? This isn't for me anymore. I'm tapping out. I in no way stopped my wife from going to the meetings, from going witnessing. As far as I was concerned, and as she was concerned, I was not a spiritual endangerment to her, because I never stopped her from doing anything, even though...
Absolute spiritual endangerment being a grounds for separation.
Yes.
Was separation on the table?
No, because she had no reason to leave me. She didn't think she was spiritually...
But was there any pressure?
Yes, there was.
Right.
There was pressure in text, loyalty to Jehovah trumps loyalty to a spouse.
So people in the congregation even tried to dismantle your marriage?
Just the elders.
Just the elders?
Yeah, and this particular elder that gave the marking talk. And that's not... I'm not surprised by that, because my friend who's disfellowshipped, who's married to his sister-in-law, what I can assume, and I am making assumptions here, going by what's happened to us, is he probably separated him and his wife, because he has admitted that he never really liked my friend anyway, and he thought that his sister-in-law was too good for him. And this just proves him right.
Yeah, that's astonishing. We were talking about that earlier, about how the elder straight up said, I didn't like this guy. Well,
yeah.
You're not really in a position to shepherd or offer any kind of help then, are you, if you don't like him? And
the same elder even said to my wife when they were trying to help her with the whole situation, I don't like Clint. I never really have.
Yeah, totally unbiased, loving. This is the love that never fails, viewers.
And I'm like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
And it's very odd, because as I explained to my wife, he's got no reason to... I've never given him a reason to not like me.
Didn't you clean his pool?
Yeah, I did.
Did you not do a very good job?
Well, he never complained, and I mean, he's...
You left one too many insects in his pool.
Exactly. But he, let's just say that if there was anything wrong with the service, he would have complained about it.
Yeah, okay.
So, if we, fast forward to the marking talk, no, we don't have to fast forward to the marking talk yet. There's a lot of stuff that happened in between that as well.
Oh, right, okay.
So basically it got to a point where I had another conversation with a friend of mine who was over from the UK, and we're pretty straight up with each other. And I'd already made the decision to not go to meetings anymore. And because she was over, I wanted to explain to her in person that I'm not. This doesn't need to affect our friendship. I'm not going to subvert your faith in any way. And she's like, oh, okay, but like, what are your reasons? And she led the whole conversation.
Interesting, yeah.
And I said, look, I don't think Jehovah's Witnesses are very unique, like in anything that they do. If you compare them to SDAs or Mormons, I think that the preaching work is ineffective. If you look, only Jehovah's Witnesses are going to survive. That's what the Bible, that's what Jehovah's Witnesses teach. She goes, no, it's based on heart condition. I'm like, no.
If it's based on heart condition, you don't need to preach.
Exactly.
You can just assume that everyone with a good heart condition is going to survive.
And what about all the people that are born Muslims or Buddhists or Hindus? And my dad used the argument like, well, look at all the Islamic people that are converting to the Jehovah's Witness faith. And I'm like, I don't see any. They're still predominantly of the
Spent
Islamic
much time
faith.
in the Middle East, have you?
Anyway, so it was the conversation with her that triggered the marking talk.
Ah, okay.
And there's a bit of contention over how this was approached. So I messaged her like a week after the marking talk, because we obviously were not very happy that the marking talk had been given. So I wrote to Bethel saying, contesting the marking talk, there's no evidence that a marking talk on apostasy should have been given. Quoted all the scriptural references that, some people just fall away and should just be left alone. And I pointed out that it actually felt like a personal vendetta against myself. If you've listened to the marking talk, I think you'll understand why. I did try to grab my hammock and go to an island and just be by myself, but there was no grounds for the marking talk. You've gone through and told a whole lot of people in the congregation before the marking talk, and this is evidenced by unfollowers on social media, including elders' wives, people that are personally related to elders. So there had been conversations beforehand, and they tried to justify it that, sometimes you can protect your spouse, but there were people that unfollowed that were just friends. They weren't ministerial servants. They were just regular rank and file publishers. So that didn't sit well with me. The fact that people were being told beforehand, and then just the vitriol that came out of the talk. It was
it's palpable.
It was very long, and it felt like a very personal attack. And I'm not someone who takes stuff personally. Everything is. My parents used to call me Teflon Man because everything just used to slide straight off me. Like, I didn't really care. But this, after I reflected on the talk, I was like, no, this really annoys me. And because I was fully awake, I wanted to show that these guys have got no power over me. Yeah.
Well, hopefully, simply by sharing the marking talk on YouTube and talking about it as we're talking about it, we are showing how powerless these men are. They have absolutely nothing meaningful to offer apart from hatred and bias and small-mindedness, and I think it's really good of you to share this material so early in your awakening. We're talking 9 months ago you were still basically a JW, and here you are now. You've come a long way. As you reflect back on everything that's happened, are you happier now, or more confused, or more depressed?
For the last 2 or 3 years, I've suffered from depression.
Right.
Because of my whole situation, like being married, being a spiritual head. My wife could tell that I was depressed, but being a Kiwi bloke, we don't really admit when that sort of stuff. But I think I finally had to come to the realization that I was severely down, and I was suffering from depression. as soon as I woke up, it disappeared.
Oh, right. So you're less conflicted now.
Yes, and I think it was the confliction
Right.
that I wasn't acknowledging that was causing my depression.
Yeah. And moving forward, what do you envision for yourself? I'm assuming you're kind of mid-30s.
I am, yes.
So what's next?
Well, I don't know.
See where the journey takes you.
Yeah, because everything's happened so fast.
Yeah.
I haven't really had time to sit down and reflect on what I want to do, what my wife and I want to do. I'm more... Before, I wasn't really interested in investing in the world. But now it's like, well, this is the only life I've got. I've got to put some money somewhere because if not, I'm just going to be... We're not going to have anything.
Sure.
So now we have to look into investing in property, getting a stable income, building up businesses, etc., like that. So that's probably the immediate focus for now. Whether I try my hand at activism, I'm not too sure. I know I've got my support group back in Sydney, Sasha, Sherry, Dave, and others.
It's a brilliant group, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I forgot to mention, I did actually reach out to Dave, and he helped guide me through the process.
So this is Dave Schmidt, who appeared on the Tell All video.
Yeah, so that's probably an important part to add in, is that and somewhere in that process, I watched the interview with Dave Schmidt and the interview with Sasha and Sherry. And I think that was before I started reading Crisis of Conscience, because I was like, I've just got to sort this out. It was like doing my head. And before I went away, I reached out to Dave, and he was really good. He helped me through the whole process, and I owe that group of people a lot.
So there's definitely something to be said for paying it forward and helping others on the journey or earlier in the journey.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's definitely motivated me to tell my story a bit, pay it forward. Hopefully it helps someone out. And hopefully, we've got a great group in Sydney, very supportive. And I'm always happy to talk to people.
Well, you've certainly helped a lot, I'm sure, by sharing your story here, and I'm sure many people will be able to relate to it. Thank you again for sharing the Marking Talk, which is just fascinating. One of the most fascinating talk recordings I think I can remember listening to. And I'm sure it will be very enlightening to many who listen to it. But just wonderful to hear your story. And just before we conclude, do you have any message for anyone watching who's maybe further earlier in the journey? They're having doubts and maybe lurking for the first time, and they stumble on this video. What would be your message to them?
Don't be afraid. It's scary. You're dismantling your whole life, and it may appear that you're going to be left with nothing. And to start with, you will be. But there is support out there for people like us on the XJW Reddit, all the YouTube comments on all the different channels. Just give yourself permission to view whatever you're comfortable with, and just let yourself process it. There's reasons that you've got doubts. Explore them. You're allowed to have them.
Wonderful. Great message. Thank you for
No problem.
sharing your story with us.
Thanks for having me.
Viewers, I hope you have enjoyed this interview. I know I have. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such interviews. But for now, thank you so much for watching.